January 1st, 1911, Sunday. Fine, frosty and sunshiny day. 10:45, did not go to church. Went for walk at 3:15. FC Atkinson here to dinner. Went to bed at 9.
We got an email out of the blue, completely out of the blue, from a bloke called Brian. Lived somewhere near Hull and had picked up 3 diaries in a cart boot sale. Hi, can anyone help? I've bought 3 diaries by David McLaren, date of birth 23rd 4th, 1897. He wrote them in the years 1911 to 1913. They are great.
He had read part of the diaries and really wanted the diaries to come home, as he put it. He wanted to find a suitable home for them back in the northeast, and he wanted somebody to publicise and tell David's story.
These diaries are packed with local and international news, local weather, Titanic sinking, Scott of the Antarctic, loads of local sports news. Does anyone want me to send them a few scanned pages? Please email and I will gladly send. Cheers, Brian. So with that kind of enthusiasm, obviously, we said yes, please.
April 23rd, 1911, Sunday. My birthday. Went to church in afternoon, walk at night to Danby Beacon. Found a moorhen's nest, took 1 egg. Fine, warmer, sunshiny day.
It's an absolute record of a bygone era through the eyes of a teenage boy. We forget when he started to write them he was only 14, and we can see as he goes through how he sort of grows up and develops, and I mean, the meticulous, because he records everything like football scores, expenditure on his pocket money.
I was intrigued because they came from this lost Edwardian period before the First World War. And David seemed to be part of that lost, vanished world.
And what we really loved about them was this was a totally unfiltered history of a small rural community, I say that with a question mark, but a small farming community in the southeast of Durham. And it's the recollections of a boy who was, 14, 15, 16.
In the 1911 census, which is right at the start of David's diary, there's about 475 people in the parish of Grindon and about 177 people who actually live in Thorpe village itself. But there were several big changes occurred from the start of the 19th century that affected the growth and development of Thorpe Thewles.
In 1833, McLaren Railway, which was one of the competitors of the Stockton-on-Darlington Railway, eventually arrived in the area. It ran from the coalfields of County Durham through Ferry Hill, down through Carlton, Norton and off to Port Clarence, and they opened a station at Carlton. But in 1880 they opened the Castle Eden branch where we are today. Carlton station had probably in the region of about 7 or 8 trains a day in each direction. Thorpe Thewles station had about 4. Thorpe Thewles, the trains would run from Stockton up to Wellfield and then on to Sunderland. Carlton, they would run from Stockton right up through Ferry Hill and off to Newcastle.
In 1865, a major blast furnace complex was built at what is now Stillington, but what was then just called Carlton Ironworks. I think there were 3 blast furnaces, an integrated coke oven and works. Iron ore and coal would have come in by rail, of course, but also people start then moving off the land a little bit. In addition to the Carlton Iron Works, in the 1870s, about 1875, just adjacent to Carlton Station itself, Saddlers of Middlesbrough built a huge chemical works for refining tar into lighter hydrocarbons. And this was also a major employer in the area. But it also caught on fire a lot. If you look at the newspapers at the time, it was always on fire. It was one of the classic things that happened, and you get some fantastic photographs of the time of huge billowing smoke filling the sky. Also, it was a dangerous industry.
When we first meet him, he's a pupil at Stockton Grammar School. He's living in the farmhouse here at Thorpe Thewles. He's a responsible lad. He has three main passions: football, cricket, and becoming a farmer.
Had a younger brother who was only a year younger than him. There was 2 years between the younger brother and Janet, his sister. Janet barely gets a mention in the diaries. She's kind of recorded as present rather than actually describing anything that she does. But he describes an awful lot about and Peter, his brother, what they do. And then he has his pet rabbits that he feeds every day. And he helps on the farm. He helps the shepherd. He camps out to keep an eye on the lambs when they've first been separated from their mums, from the ewes. And some of those elements of David's enthusiasms are there all the way through. They don't change.
David's whole family were very privileged. The boys certainly went to grammar school and they were in fee paying. And I suspect that there wasn't too much mixing apart from football matches and cricket games.
May 10th, 1911, Wednesday. Tarrant has made a century for MCC versus Yorkshire. MCC have a strong team out. Mother was at the hirings in Stockton today to get a new maid and succeeded. Eva is the one that is leaving. Ainsley has taken Barry's rabbit away tonight. Answered Cortum's PC about...
The McLarens were tenants of Lloyd Boyne, which is true for all of the farms in the village. There were 4 farms in the village. And it's interesting because being tenant farmers, you have to know your place.
A tenant farmer will be leasing the farmland from the landowner, and it was very common. It's still actually very common for farmers not to actually own their farms, to be leasing them from somebody else. But essentially, that's what it is. He's basically paying rent to another landlord for his farm and for his farmhouse.
There definitely was a very strong social hierarchy. People would have been very, very conscious of where they belonged in the village pecking order. David's family, the McLarens, really saw themselves, I think, at the top of the tree. They lived and worked in Manor Farm, but they just referred to it as the Manor. So they probably saw themselves as lords of the manor, although they weren't. And I think on one occasion when Lord Boyne came, William McLaren was asked to hold Lord Boyne's horse, which kind of put him in his place in front of the rest of the villagers. So I don't know how he felt about that, but even they fell into the class system, it was very clear.
Whereas the McLarens regarded themselves as top-notch in Thorpe, the biggest farm, the largest household, probably the most advanced farming techniques in the village. This kind of stratified society, I think, was under threat at this time, and it was changing at this time.
When you look at the actual breakdown of the populations, how they were employed, this is just people in the village, I think we've got about 27% in agriculture, which is not unexpected, 19% in heavy industry, around 19% in domestic service, 16% working on the local railways, and then a further 6% of the village worked in services, police, school teachers. So it's an interesting breakdown demographic of where people were working, in which sectors.
A newspaper is the principal form of news dissemination before the First World War. There is no wireless, there is no television, certainly none of this internet thingy. There is an explosion of local and regional titles really up to the First World War from about 1870 sort of time. And they do, though, have a real political stance, most of them. So your newspaper purchase often is dictated by your view of politics as well. So there's a real kind of political element running through these papers.
I think at the start he's probably picking up other opinions from newspapers, from schools and things. But later I think he's more reflective on his own thoughts and feelings about things. Because of course he was only just 14 when they started. So he was relatively young, probably he was very influenced by other people in his thoughts and ideas.
It has to be his father more than anything. His mother's hardly mentioned, and when it is, it's to do with holidays and with cultural stuff. So she guides him in the cultural aspects of things. But his father is the man who makes decisions.
Things like the telephone, although we had telephones in Stockton from 1885 and Wynyard Hall had a telephone in 1882 on the Stockton Exchange, Thorpe Thewles doesn't seem to have had telephones until the 1930s.
There was no electricity. There was no television. But I think that's why he was writing the diary. It's part of this amuse yourselves, because nobody else is going to do it for you.
They have lots of visitors over. The visitors, they play bridge. There are not quite concert parties, but there are entertainments in which David and various other members of the family put on mini plays.
David gets his bike in February 1911, and by September 1911, he's done over 1,000 miles because he's got it fitted with a cyclometer, and so he clocks up the miles as he goes along.
I mean, those bicycle rides he did were just, you're joking. Even reading it, I wasn't tired out. I mean, that was just crazy.
But the number of punctures that they get on unmade roads is beyond belief. So you just wish he would spend more money on inner tyres or whatever you had to do.
Last night I put my back tyre up before I left school, and I had to pump it up when I was halfway out as well. I had meant to get up early this morning and look at it, but I forgot to tell Mother to wake me early. So when I went to my bike this morning, I found the tyre flat and I was unable to blow it up.
I remember my bicycle, and I had to have a puncture kit with it. And it was always, like David's, getting a puncture, which used to drive me mad. It didn't bother them, did it? They just got on with it. That's the thing about them. They just got on with it.
June 20th, 1911, Tuesday. The Mayor of Stockton gave us our medals at 11:30 today. He pinned them on personally. They are jolly decent. Have done 1,140 miles on bike. Fine, warm, sunshiny day.
George V had become king previous year due to his father's death.
Well, here we are. We've got these pages here, and the paper covers it as a local event and as a national event. In fact, we have reports from all over the place, as well as, of course, from London, and we have what we would regard now as all the background features on who these people are who are being crowned.
June 21st, 1911, Wednesday. Stockton is very gay with coronation decorations. The tram lines have a line of flags stretched their whole length. The baby linen shop, Robinson's, Blackburn Roads are the prettiest shops. All the pubs are good, which shows that they are a paying concern anyway. We broke up today for the coronation.
This one is unusual because on the reverse it's got all the words of the national anthem. So you would have no excuse for not knowing the words. You could hold your mug up and sing. I think his proudest moment of the coronation was when the Mayor of Stockton presented these coronation medals. We don't know who in general got them, but obviously the boys at Stockton Grammar School got them. And he was very proud of them, of getting it, and described it as jolly decent, which in David's understated way actually means he was pretty thrilled with it. In the back of it, it says Councillor M. Robinson, I think it says JP there where the ring's gone through. Mayor of Stockton, coronation 22nd of June 1911. We've got Britannia, we've got the Royal Coat of Arms, and then that's Stockton's Coat of Arms.
June 22nd, 1911, Thursday. Coronation Day. We had our flags out, of course, went to church. In the cricket match, married versus single, the married won. Scores, married 85, Mr. Usher 38, Mr. Fishburne 11, Jack Wilkinson 8, not out.
He was very excited, said Stockton looked wonderful, all the shops and the trams were all decorated.
There's a wonderful picture of the new King and Queen there, and a brilliant advert underneath for indigestion and biliousness constipation syrup, which is very efficacious, I am sure. So having reported the national events, the Northern Echo then turns to 3 pretty dense pages of reporting of the local events.
We forget in those days there was no way of the general public participating in the event in real time. So what they did do, they actually came into the church. There was a church service which must have been on at the same time as the actual coronation service. So that would be a way that people felt they'd come together and marked it together.
Patriotic enthusiasm ran high in the sister boroughs of Stockton and Thornaby yesterday. These are different times, really, where the King and Queen really are, and the royal family is the focal point and the embodiment of what the nation is, which is why there's so much interest in it.
In the sports at night, I won the half-mile hurdle race and got a spirit flask. We lighted our bonfire at 11 p.m, went to bed at 12 p.m. There were a good lot of bonfires. Fine, dull, windy.
And he said there was lots of bonfires. Now, whether he means individual families had their own, or from here they could maybe see surrounding villages the glow of. But he went to bed at 12, so he obviously didn't linger long. You know, it was only an hour after the bonfire was lit and he was in bed.
August 11th, 1911, Friday. My father has piles and lies on the sofa all day. I looked after the camp this morning and dyed things up. In the afternoon I looked after the lambs, finished cutting oats in Big Field and started beans in Cabin Field. Fine, warm day, dull at times.
David was quite young and he used to go to the bank for his father to get money to pay the farmers. Now, when he was only 15, and he had to go to another town to get it. Amazing. He also had to work with other people on the farm, so he's expected to lead what was being done.
At school, he's captain of sport, effectively head boy, in charge of all the prefects.
They have servants in the house, at least 2, sometimes 3, from what I can gather. And they probably need them. I mean, poor old Mrs. McLaren doesn't get much of a look in these diaries at all, because I think she's just far too busy to bother with it and to bother with them. She's got a constant stream of visitors. Plus, she has to provide food for not only her 3 kids and her husband, but also for at least 3 farm apprentices who live in the house. She gets through an awful lot of maidservants, kitchen maids, whatever. Sometimes it's really difficult to tell who's come and who's gone from the diaries. And because David doesn't seem to bother either, there seems to be a constant sign of change.
I forgot to say that Louisa Mills, the housemaid, got the push on Thursday night for cheek. She had already given her notice, but she went too far on Thursday night, and so father said she could go. It has caused quite a sensation in the house. She came on Friday for her box, which she had taken to Stones on Thursday. Today was fine, but very overcast.
They don't last long. Now, why is that? I think Mrs. McLaren is probably very bossy. She's far too demanding. Well, why is she far too demanding? You know, maybe it's something to do as well with her husband's aspirations, trying to ensure that visitors are visiting fairly frequently, but then those visitors need to be looked after. And Mrs. McLaren can only do so much. She's relying, perhaps over-relying, on a few servant girls. Often
working on a farm or being a domestic on the farm, yes, hard work, but you're in the fresh air, often access to better food than if you're a domestic in one of the industrial towns of the period.
At one point she goes to the hirings in Stockton in order to find a replacement maid, and then David writes, and she succeeded, which suggests that you didn't always succeed.
The hiring fair took place in Stockton High Street twice a year. Farm workers and servants, men and women, came from all over. You know, they came from North Yorkshire, County Durham, all over the place, looking for work. And they would gather in the Borough Hall, which was open for them.
There was often a lot of revelry as well. For a lot of places, it was a highlight of the year.
So we can't tell why there was this rapid turnover. What it does suggest is that the terms of employment for women working in service didn't give you any real continuity of contract.
William McLaren seems to have been a very forward-thinking farmer for his time. He must have been well read. He knew what was going on in terms of experimental farms in the country.
He's away meeting people who would obviously further his status as well. You know, he becomes a judge in farming things, and this is clearly important to him.
The North East, really from kind of probably the late 1700s through the Victorian period, had really been very instrumental in a number of agricultural improvements. Our contribution, not just nationally but internationally, to breeding and selective breeding of cattle and sheep was really almost second to none.
I mean, it was clear that they had a good farm going. It was very disciplined. Definitely, all the way through you hear that.
We have a shorter growing season than a lot of the rest of England. We get about, on average, 4 to 5 weeks less time to get stuff in the ground and harvested than you would if you're in sort of somewhere like Hampshire or Berkshire.
We started mucking the land for mangolds on the far side of Three Arches. We were leading the manure from the Midden in Station Field and had 3 carts on Jack, George Young and Seaton. There's a very big strike on at present and all the railways are idle, except the mail trains. We are not getting papers, so I go into Stockton to get them.
When there was a railway strike, you know, that is a significant event because it disrupts things. David and his family use these train lines to go and visit relatives up in County Durham and Newcastle. His father goes off to Scotland to visit relatives, perhaps fellow farmers as well.
August 18th, 1911, Friday. Strikers still holding out, riots in places, £50,000 of meat wasting at Liverpool. My father was going to Rothbury today and got as far as Newcastle but could get no further, so he came back to Darlington and Joe met him there with the trap.
His records of strikes aren't about the ins and outs of the strikes, why things happened or the results of it. It's always about the inconvenience. I couldn't get to, my father couldn't get to. He talks about world politics, but he doesn't have a political perspective on things. He chooses not to involve himself in those. And sometimes he just misses out on things, like the children's strike. When we had this was a huge period in British history, the Great Unrest, 3 years of the Great Unrest, which all these 3 diaries are part of, when the world was changing, absolutely changing.
Well, for Lincolnshire. The strike was settled today, and all will be in working order tomorrow. It has done a lot of needless harm. Fine, warm day, windy.
David seemed to concentrate more on world events, such as the Italian-Turk War and the Balkans going on, and he had quite a foresight of future. He could see that these acts of war between these countries could possibly lead to something much worse.
Turkey, it seems, did not declare war on Greece yesterday along with Serbia and Bulgaria because they had hopes of keeping at peace with the Greeks, who have no material advantage to gain by the war. The Bulgarians and Serbians have both advanced over the Turkish frontier. In the game at school this afternoon, the defence were beaten. I've forgotten the score, but...
We're seeing the world on the cusp of disaster. The disaster of the First World War, and there are references to what's going on in the Balkans, and you know, we're kind of looking at it, you know, what is happening here? Is this the spark that will ignite the tinderbox?
As you read in the diaries, you get this feeling of, oh, poor David. He would have been a great farmer.
January the 21st, 1912, Sunday. Second round, Fulham versus Liverpool. I went to Sunday school today as a teacher. The kids behaved very badly, and 2 in my class lost their conduct marks. Wrote to Armstrong College asking for a syllabus for their 3 years course.
The role of the church does function very highly in the village, I think, during this time, as it had done in the century before that and even earlier. The vicar would have sat fairly high up in the social pecking order, arguably at the top. The school in the village was heavily influenced by the Church of England, and there was a very active Sunday school for the young kids as well. And we know that David took part and sometimes led those Sunday school services and classes.
Went to Sunday school. I had all the first class of boys today, and as Billy Brownless was trying to be too clever, I hit him and made him cry. Went for a walk before, read the boys on paper at night. Fine day.
There were two boys particularly that were a bête noire for him. They were always mucking him about, playing about. One of them was called Willie Brownless, and then there were the Bottomley boys.
Went to Sunday school in the afternoon. At the beginning I only had 3 boys, W. Brownless and the 2 Bottomleys, but the former and L. Bottomley behaved themselves so badly during the opening prayers that I stood them both up before I began the lesson. Then they began to grin, so I slapped them both over the head, and W. Brownless tried to go out of the school, but I prevented him. But Mother said that if he wanted to go, I should let him go.
I thought, oh, lovely, a Sunday school teacher, and he's hitting people. But you see, he almost seemed to take a sadistic pleasure in people at school got a good thrashing or deserved a good thrashing.
Incredibly, he clips some of his young charges around the ear on more than one occasion. David doesn't seem to realise that there are alternative ways of doing things.
Cleaned my rabbits out. We were playing Henry Smiths today and lost 9-0. There was a cheeky kid on the field who would not go off at half-time, so I gave him a mighty shove which sent him head over heels, and he said some money came out of his pocket. We found 1 pence and gave it to him.
In the school and in Sunday school, David feels totally entitled to slap somebody down, quite literally, and put them in their place. And so it's this spare the rod, spoil the child in operation.
Discipline has to be instilled from childhood, or self-discipline. I think, I don't like the word discipline on its own. Self-discipline, you have to make choices. Self-discipline is imposed from childhood. The Bottomleys didn't have self-discipline, and that irritated David, I think, because he felt they should know how to behave. And if they didn't know how to behave, there was a price to be paid.
It was allowed to push and to thump and to do things like that. That lasted generations. It didn't just happen in 1912. That happened when I was at school.
The Bottomleys, by the way, all became village policemen, which is a lovely end to the story.
March 22nd, 1912, Friday. The coal strike does not seem to be anything like settled yet, as the coal owners seem to be all against it. A coal merchant from Middlesbrough came out at the beginning of the week and got 12 trolley loads of coal from Thorpe Station. I hear that merchants from the towns have cleared all the country stations of coal, so it would seem that it is getting scarce.
One of the interesting things about the North Eastern Railway is that the station master actually seemed to own the rights to sell coal, so he could get the coal in and the land sale coal would be sold off, and he would cream off a little bit of the profits of that.
Wages were falling and prices were rising, and there was a call for a minimum wage. His only reference is, oh, well, we can't get coal, you know, like there's no coal in the coal houses now, and then there's no mention of the fact that at the end of the strike there was a minimum wage act, which was phenomenal.
March 31st, 1912, Sunday. Went to church this morning. Gordon, Roland, Mother and Janet went also. Wrote an essay tonight on women's suffrage.
David McLaren, in his diaries, and I think his father even more so, because let's face it, a 14-year-old, 15-year-old boy will have listened to his father. They think that suffragettes are a nonsense. They think that people have to do as they are told.
The Derby was ran today and was the signal for sensations. First Anma, the King's horse, ridden by H. Jones, was brought down by a suffragette, Miss Davison. She is in a critical condition and Jones was slightly hurt. Anma would not have been anywhere even if they had not done this.
We don't really know what he thought about the principle of votes for women, but we know what he thought of what Emily Wilding Davison did at the Derby on the 4th of June in 1913.
That particular entry, there was a spectacle, and then Miss Davison was hurt, the jockey was slightly hurt, and the horse, well, the horse wouldn't have done that was the final bit of it. The horse wouldn't have achieved anything anyway, he wasn't going to win. And I was thinking, you know, this woman is critically ill. Oh, the horse wouldn't have won anyway.
Women didn't need to vote. That's what men did. Women looked after the house. Women looked after the children. And I think he would hear this, not only from his father, but fellow workers. And he will have had newspapers about what they were up to.
And his interpretation of them, clearly, these people were just nuts.
Miss Davison, the suffragette who brought down the King's horse in the Derby, has died of her injuries. Some fools are prattling about her giving her life for the cause of women's suffrage and what a noble deed it was. Personally, I think she was a crack-brained idiot and her deed was worthy only of being recorded in order to show what limits some people will go to in their craze for notoriety.
What strikes me as being very odd, it seems to, when you read the diaries, it's got a very keen interest in national and international affairs, but not so much in the local affairs. You know, 1911, one of the major things in the area that happened, the opening of the Transporter Bridge, he completely ignores that, completely ignores it, and it's very odd that he should do that. And he was also very interested in sport. Football, and I think Stockton Town won the FA Cup one year, and he doesn't mention that.
He writes about disasters. He's very fond of a good disaster, but I think that's probably true of any 14, 15-year-old boy.
April 18, 1912, Thursday, on holiday in the lakes. The White Star liner Titanic, the largest ship afloat, and which was on her maiden voyage from Southampton to New York, struck an iceberg on Sunday and sunk early Monday morning. It is believed that 1,500 perished at least. Among the latter is Colonel J.J. Astor, the multimillionaire.
This is a huge event. It is a psychological event as well as a terrible disaster because the Titanic, the biggest ship on the entire planet, made in Britain, bits of it made here in the northeast in Darlington as well, is kind of representative of Britain dominating, ruling the waves. So for it to go down is a disaster, but it's also a psychological event. And it is the greatest maritime disaster ever recorded.
It seems no one realised how serious the accident was until quite late, and all the passengers were even playing snowballs with the snow that came on board. Captain Smith stuck to his ship till the last, and many brave deeds were performed.
One of the things that he does talk about quite frequently, there are 5 or 6 mentions of Scott's expedition, and in 1912, of course, Scott, with 4 companions, headed for the South Pole, only to be beaten there by about 5 weeks by the Norwegian Amundsen. And Scott and his men perish, but we don't get the news for some time, of course.
The expedition, commanded by Captain Scott, which was to make an attempt for the South Pole, has just returned with news of a most tragic nature. Captain Scott and 5 companions, after reaching the Pole on January the 17th, 1912, have all perished on the way back.
I think in Victorian Edwardian England there is an absolute fascination and patriotic fascination in exploration. They're going out, they're doing brave, daring stuff, and they usually have the flag flying as well. So they are part of the national identity as well as being almost the sports stars of that era.
The deed which is the most admired of all the brave deeds in the Antarctic tragedy is that of Captain Oates, who, knowing he was a hindrance to the party owing to his inability to walk, unselfishly gave up his own life in order that his 3 companions might have a chance of regaining safety. This was heroism.
That was kind of real. Boys' Own Stuff gets heavily involved in raising money for Scots groups, families, support.
It truly shocked Edwardian society you know, the whole imperial project seemed to be at risk.
He still was a young person, so wouldn't he love to be a hero like that? And in fact, he was a hero in the end, in the war.
Recently there happened a terrible accident at Aysgill near Hawes Junction, close to where the former accident happened nearly 3 years ago. One train was standing still as they had run short of steam going up an incline, and another train ran into it from behind.
2 passenger trains were going up an incline, one not too far behind the other. Both did not have the capacity they should have, and both, this is then when they had the report after the disaster, both had cheap coal, which meant there was a lot of slack in there, which kind of meant again that they didn't have the strength to get up this incline. So the first one had stopped. The second one, a distance behind, missed the danger signals because they were having to deal with the outcome of a blocked steam jet or something like that. Again, because of the cheap coal. So the first they knew was they were actually right on top of the train. The first carriage on the train was hit, and then it vaulted over and hit the first class carriage as well, I think. So there were, and then it went on fire.
15 people were killed. They were difficult to identify, so charred were their bodies. Indeed, one person was identified solely by the peculiar shape of the buttons which she wore and which were picked up from among the debris, the Board of Trade are inquiring into the matter. There has been a great disaster in Wales in one of the pits. The Sengennydd pit on Monday was the scene of a serious explosion which gave rise to a great fire.
The Universal Colliery at Sengennydd, about 6 miles west of Caerphilly, unfortunately suffered a terrible explosion. At 8 o'clock, the morning shift descended, 950 men, and just after an explosion occurred of fire damp that ultimately resulted in the deaths of 439 miners. Say, the worst pit disaster in Britain's history. And it left 1,500 families in the village with no fathers or brothers or sons. And even for David, who would have seen pit disasters on a smaller scale announced probably every 6 months or a year, this was something different.
There have been no more men rescued from the mine disaster in Wales, and they must have all perished by now of hunger and the oppressive darkness. The flames are still raging and they're going to flood the mine.
When I was looking at both the railway disaster and the pit disaster that he talks about, he only reports it. He doesn't say anything about the consequences or the reasons. The railway disaster was the fault of the owners. The pit disaster was actually in large part the fault of the colliery manager. Those things still would have been in the newspapers. Perhaps not as big as the headlines would have been for the disasters, but it would have been there.
August the 17th, 1912, Saturday. Today was the day that the first annual show of the Thorpe Thewles Horticultural Society was held in Vicarage Field. It kept fair and the show was a great success.
We've got an idea about what happens in the village every year, because they seem to have a pattern. You have the church all the time, obviously, and then you have some things which occur every year, like a village social, and you go and you pay 6 pence to the school and you play games And then you do dancing, at which point David McLaren goes home because he's not in for that at all. Today was one of the days when Thorpe shines. It only shines about 4 times a year, and this was one of them. It was Hospital Sunday. All the collections taken at church are for the hospital, and a band is engaged for the night. It is also the occasion on which the Old Fellows walk. The choir and vicar walk around the village green behind the Old Fellows, with the band in front, and then go to church.
The hospitals were dependent on support. Now the churches were very much behind these things, as were sometimes trade unions. They used to have a hospital Sunday once a year where every effort was made to raise money for the hospital. The collections and everything would go into the hospital fund.
October 27th, 1912, Sunday. Went to church today. Reverend J.W. Ayton was preaching. Curries have been summoned under the Cruelty to Servants Act and will probably get a heavy punishment. I start the 6 weeks course at college tomorrow, and I'm going to stay at Benton at Dora Russell's.
We were reading the diaries about the rabbits, feeding the rabbits and collecting the eggs. And then suddenly, in 1912, this one sentence comes up, which was, Curry has been brought up and is to be tried at Durham Assizes next week for cruelty to his servant. And we all went, what? What's happened here? So this turns out to have been sensationalised massively in newspapers, but it was the talk of all of the newspapers that I can see, right from the Dundee Courant in the north of Scotland, well, in Scotland, down to kind of places in the south of England. They all carried the same kind of story. And the Curry, Sam Curry, and Eliza Curry, his wife, had been accused of a series of fairly awful acts against their servant girl, who was called Dora. And Dora ended up, allegedly, after a few months at the Currys, emaciated, bruised, scared rigid.
November the 10th, 1912, Sunday. The whole village is immensely interested in the Curry's servant girl case. They were all at their doors yesterday morning with tin cans, etc., trying to give her a good send-off. But to their disappointment, Mrs. Curry had not to appear yesterday, and so did not go.
The people in the village were absolutely fascinated by this. And the evidence that was given, particularly against Mrs. Curry, Eliza, was that she had systematically beaten this 19-year-old maid with all kinds of horrible things, like she was beating her at one point with an iron rod. She was beating her with a horsewhip. She was beating her with the stock of a whip. These beatings came about once Dora said that she wanted to leave.
Before the First World War, we had the servant problem, in which young girls were treated really badly. Their employers treated them really as dirt. They treated them as objects. This problem is arising partly because so many of these girls were beginning to have other opportunities. So there was a real change afoot. And I think this is a precursor in many ways to those changes in which working class people were able to protest and gain much more than they had previously.
she was late setting the fire early one morning, and Mrs. Curry came in, Eliza came in, washed out a chamber pot, and then made Dora drink from the water from the washed out chamber pot. And at that point, obviously, there was a sensation in the court as that was related. Another thing that happened was that at one point, Mrs. Curry pushed her face into the fire and it set light to her blouse. And Sam Curry was also there and didn't do anything to help the girl. And all the time during the beatings, he didn't really beat her very often. He did once or twice until her ear bled, but he was not the main beater. But he let his wife get on with it and even said, "Isn't it a good thing I found that whip?"
There had been legislation put in place, gradually to try and improve the lot of not just workers in factories and what have you, but workers in general. That said, we even today we know there are good employers and bad employers. There are employers that take advantage. There are employees that take advantage in some cases, but generally the lot of the worker, if you like, had improved really quite a bit from the mid-1800s.
The jury were asked by the judge 2 questions. Do you think that she was forbidden food and lodging? And do you think she was beaten, was the second question. The jury returned after 35 minutes and they gave the Currys a clean bill of health or clean sheet on the first count. They said they hadn't mistreated her by not giving her lodging, and they hadn't basically starved her. But they were both found guilty of physical harm to their servant.
November the 15th, 1912, Friday. Mr. and Mrs. Curry have been tried by the judge at the Durham Assizes yesterday and today and were found guilty of inflicting bodily harm on their servant, Dora Johnson, by the jury. Sam Curry was sentenced to 12 months hard labour, while Eliza Curry got 18 months. Old Mrs. Curry and the kids are still at Thorpe. Nobody seems to be on the side of Sam and Eliza, the general idea being that they ought to have got more.
William McLaren is given the job of valuing the Curry farm for the next tenant. And you have to think a bit about the Curry family. I mean, obviously, what they did was awful. They had 2 girls, and his mother were living there as well. So they lost their house, they lost their livelihood, they lost their friends in the village, and yet they're still buried in the churchyard. So, yeah, it was Thorpe Thewles' claim to fame in 1912.
The rooms that we used for the Cambridge exam are all still out of bounds, except Mr. Glasspool's room. This is probably due to the fact that one of the girls who took the Cambridge has developed measles. This fact probably also explains why Mr. Glasspool gave all the Cambridge candidates a half holiday this afternoon on condition that they played football.
Edwardian England was in perpetual dread of measles. David and other family members would avoid social contact with youngsters when measles was prevalent. In particular, and we see this several times during the diaries, they would avoid going to Sunday school.
I did not feel any better this morning, so I did not get up. Miss Wortley thought last night that it might be measles, and this morning when I was all out in a rash, there was decided mention of that ominous word. I hope for obvious and numerous reasons that it is not measles. The baby of James, one of our men, has measles, so when the doctor came to see it today, we caught him and he came to decide my fate. He said at once without any hesitation that it was measles.
Measles could make you go blind. Measles could give you pneumonia. Measles could send you to be deaf. Measles could kill you. And there was a fear around that disease. And it spread very rapidly because it was very contagious.
My figures tell me that before measles vaccinations started in 1963, epidemics would occur every 2 or 3 years, killing an estimated 2.6 million people, mainly young children who are more susceptible, globally each year.
It is a queer thing, the measles. Except for the rash which comes out all over one, it is very like a cold. Your eyes water, your head is stuffed with cold, and you have a cough. The cough is rather peculiar and is known to nurses as measles cough. Father was at Stockton today, as is usual on a market day. I dozed the greater part of the day.
And there's mention of going into Stockton to get medicine, but I really don't know what sort of medicine they would get because aspirin wasn't on the go. Might have been quinine, or it might have been some of these quack herbal remedies, but really there was nothing to do other than treat the symptoms and sit it out and wait.
David gets measles, Peter gets measles, Janet gets measles. We get a mention of one of the farm workers whose baby catches measles, but we don't hear what happened to this poor baby.
And what amazed me was that Father still went to market to buy cattle. You were still carrying that virus with you, even though you weren't affected by it.
Tuesday, March 4th, 1913. I received a letter this morning from the Durham County Education Committee saying that I had won the scholarship of £30 a year, tenable at the Armstrong College for 3 years. I'm jolly glad of this, as my father said that if I won the scholarship, I could have the £6 which was granted me for expenses for myself.
If you could write few, you would write few, but he didn't, of course, because you wouldn't have done then. He was obviously incredibly pleased, and pleased for his father that he wouldn't have to pay so much, but also very pleased with his father that his father gave him a certain proportion of that grant for himself.
As you go through the sort of the Victorian period, you start to get agricultural colleges starting to appear. So those ideas of those farming practices, those improvements, actually being started to put into books that are then taught, and the sons going to these agricultural colleges and seeing examples of best practice.
And then it's interesting that just as he's going up to join the academics course, he has to go out and buy the things which make him look like a gentleman, including, I think, a bowler hat. I think that's the point at which he wears his bowler hat as well.
I was quite surprised there was less socialising during the week with his fellow students, but he does say that there was quite a lot of students, international students, so even then what Armstrong College at the time was part of Durham University. It's now part of one of the buildings of Newcastle University, but he would be mixing with very, very different people, students from overseas.
And he's quite snidey about other people. And I don't know whether that's because for the first time he's actually up against other people who are as able as him. So maybe he's being defensive in that.
He's very keen on the science of farming, and so was his father, like applying scientific methods to, and botanical methods to, farming. So I would say that he was aiming to take over the family farm, being the elder son, if things had been different. However, he did join the officer training court almost on his first day at Armstrong College. Now, that would be seen at the time as like the training corps for future army officers. We don't know why he chose to join that so quickly. I know he'd done like drill and things at school. We know he's very patriotic and things, because when the First World War started, that was the first place, of course, they went for officers.
In 1913, there are references to him being interested in hens. I think Buff Orpington's gets a mention somewhere, but there are also mentions of his rabbits, and he decides to have nothing more to do with his rabbits, his beloved rabbits, in quite a lyrical passage in his diary.
April 4th, 1913, Friday, 4 eggs. My last rabbit was given to Harold, and in future I shall get along in this life without rabbits. I've had them a good many years now, but I have no interest in them now. Time, who makes events of today the memories of tomorrow, has carried me past the age when rabbits were an everlasting delight.
He's letting go of his childhood. I think that's what it is. He's moving on. It's beautiful. It's quite beautifully, movingly written. So yeah, there's emotion, an acknowledgement. He's made money out of it. I mean, he's quite entrepreneurial. He's loved the sharing of that too, I think, and that has to stop.
October the 7th, 1913, Tuesday. I started college today. I went to the office first and paid the fees. It was a bit of a muddle up there, but I got out at last. I then went and joined the OTC and went to Benton.
The Officer Training Corps was an army establishment which effectively ran training for future officers of the British Army. And this was linked to educational establishments. People would be doing their normal studies as part of school or college life, and then they would be drilling on 1 or 2 nights a week and learning military law and rules and preparing in a very basic way. Some shooting, some handling of weapons.
They bore him silly, but he turns up every week and he's saying things like, went to OTC, we did the same this week as we did last week. Or else we spent our entire time loading and unloading our rifles. So he's obviously doesn't take it to it with a great deal of enthusiasm, but he does see it as a duty. Now, I think that if it was just something which he was doing for fun, because he was finding it so boring, it would have been stupid to continue with it. It suggests to me that he did have an awful feeling about what might be coming.
November the 18th, 1913, Tuesday. The real fighting in the Balkans seems to have ended now, and they are now engaged in settling things. They have decided to form a new kingdom, but they have yet to decide who the king will be. The new kingdom will be called Albania, and so far as I can make out, will consist of the country between Serbia and the Aegean Sea.
A lot of the attitudes in private schools, and possibly even Stockton Grammar School, has been criticism of how much they pushed an attitude of no use unless you go, for king and country. So it was possibly instilled in him from school that if there's a war, you will fight.
He writes an incredible account of his fears for the future in the back end of 1913.
One hopes that France will never declare war on Germany, for I think it would set not only Europe but all the world ablaze, and the dogs of war would rush through the various countries and lay waste many a fruitful valley and render desolate many a smiling hamlet. For war is the most dreadful thing that can befall a country. It is worse than the plague, for it lays waste the land as well as killing the people. And if France and Germany went to war, it would not only be one country, but all Europe that would be thus laid to waste.
There are so many things that he could have become, and yet right from the start there was no doubt he was intended to be a farmer.
Obviously from the diaries, David had such potential going forward. He wasn't only just lined up to take over his father's farm in the village, but the qualities he was showing at the time, leadership, interest in science and agriculture, I'm sure he would have gone on to be a massive figure locally. I could have seen David entering local politics, possibly even becoming an MP. He certainly got that drive about him, and he got the interest in what was going on in the surrounding communities.
This is one thing that goes through his life, you know, doing the right thing, doing what he's persuaded perhaps to think of as his responsible course of action. He's a responsible person. He accepts responsibilities. He doesn't shirk from them. And in the end, he does what he thinks he should do and joins up.
December the 31st, 1913, Wednesday. We were threshing barley this morning. We finished about 10:30 and Father and I changed and went into Stockton. The country looked very pretty in its mantle of snow, and we saw a scene typical of winter as pictured by artists as we came out. The sun, a red ball in the sky, setting behind a belt of trees covered with snow. How often has one seen this on Christmas cards and other pictures depicting winter?
He must have finished his first year at university in like the summer of 1914. And he's obviously gone straight and he's got a commission because of his background, because he's a university student, because he's in the officer training corps.
He went out as a machine gunning officer. So he was a lieutenant in what is now the Green Howards. And his job would have been to get out of the trench and set up the machine gun. It wouldn't have been to lie there and machine gun troops coming towards you. It would have been to set up the machine gun. And that would have made you a sitting duck to any enemy sniper who happened to see you.
Officers at all levels were vulnerable, and this is because leadership it has to be seen to be visible. So the visibility of leadership is I'm the first man over the top. I lead my platoon out of the trench. You know, I don't ask people to do things I don't do myself. These are cultures which go all the way back to the OTC training. This is the culture of leadership in the army. At that stage of the war, the British Army officer's uniform distinguished him from a private soldier. So both in terms of the rank badges on the cuff and the shoulder. His headgear at that stage of the war is the officer's cap. The steel helmet doesn't come in until after David's trench service. So, you know, and that was as a consequence of the high level of head injuries. If you're in a trench down below ground level and people are firing artillery above you, naturally head injuries are going to be significant, and if your head sticks up over the trench, that's the first thing that's going to get hit. So with all that in mind, naturally the enemy is going to kill officers first, cynically, because you want to remove the command and control element of the people you're fighting, and that's both sides are trying to do that. That's part of war.
He gets shot by a sniper, and the injury is quite devastating. The bullet, we do have his army record, and the doctors there record that the bullet entered here at the cheekbone, and it exited above his right eye. So it goes in through the left cheekbone, up through his head, and comes out just above his right eye.
I'm imagining, and it is an imagination, that having woken up alive from what happened to him, that total absolute shock is quite an equalizer, isn't it? When your privilege, your previous privilege, isn't there, then he would have had to reevaluate. He was a very intelligent person, so he would have reevaluated his life, and he'd clearly made the most of what he could. His blindness didn't stop him.
Had it been, just a little bit further back, it would have been curtains for him. It's kind of just missed his brain. David didn't lose his eyes, so he had eyes intact. And that's recorded in his military record and confirmed by his great nephew as well.
If there's any luck in it, it's receiving a wound outside of a battle, because at that stage the medical systems aren't overstretched. So it would be quickly, regimental stretcher bearers would be called up. They would carry him through the trenches on a stretcher back to an advanced dressing station, and probably, given the nature of his injuries, as quickly as he could safely and be stabilised and removed back to Britain.
He was treated at St Dunstan's in London, which was the rehabilitation centre for, then it was for blinded sailors and soldiers. It's now called Blind Veterans UK. So he was training as a typist because they had to find work that blinded men could do. And actually this is how he met his wife, because his wife was head of telephony and braille typing. So through that's how we met Edith. And one of the things that they used to train them to do was poultry farming. Well, David was already keeping chickens and things, so it was just a natural progression.
He comes back here. He has a house built just over the road over there called Little Garth, and he has a chicken farm. And I have friends in my generation who remember him very, very clearly.
My name's Graham McLaren Lister, and my grandmother was Janet McLaren, which is David's sister. I knew David in his latter years. He wasn't really that well. Obviously, he was in his 70s when I knew him, and he used to have his eyes shut all the time. But don't be deceived. He knew exactly what was going on, and me and my sister occasionally used to come up to Little Garth, the farm, and we'd be in the house, and sometimes we think he's asleep on the couch, and my sister and I would get up to some mischief, and he'd say, "I might not be able to see you, but I know exactly what you're up to."
He goes on to take on responsible roles in the community, parish council roles, head of the parish council, and he was a highly respected person in the village, and there's still people in the village today that remember David with fondness and with awe, because I think he was not a guy to be messed with, and many kids that would go scrumping apples in his backyard would get shouted at and would know not to mess with David McLaren.
I think William saw David taking over the farm and running the farm, so all that must have come crashing down when David was injured during the war. But he fought back because he's resilient. Don't give in. If you've got a problem, there's a way to solve it. And that was their attitude to life.
All of those kind of organisational and leadership qualities that we saw in the young man hadn't been shot out of him. They were still there. But he must have looked back with such sadness of what he would have wanted to be. And then you think about the family as a whole as well. There they all are in this photograph. And there's Mr. and Mrs. McLaren and their 2 sons. And you think about it, 10 years later, they had one blinded son, and you had a younger brother, Peter, who had also gone into the war, who was dead by 1922.
The records are very sparse around Peter, but we do know that initially he was in the Honourable Artillery Company. We know his service was as a driver, so his duty would be to take the gun into action and take the horses back. And what we find is later in the war, both sides using gas extensively as a weapon to suppress artillery fire. And what we find is that Peter was gassed, and it's believed to have been mustard gas. Now, mustard gases, we're looking at post-1917, it's a particularly nasty gas. The impact of wounds of all kinds can linger on and become chronic and debilitating throughout somebody's life. The other thing I'd say about the lung damage that was clearly identified for Peter from his gassing was that we know that the thing that came at the end of the First World War were the flu pandemics. So, you know, the Spanish flu, as it was called then. And that significantly killed many soldiers and former soldiers and people who were particularly at risk, obviously, if they'd experienced damage to their lungs through gassing and what have you. So there's a number of things going on there which make him more vulnerable.
We don't really know what the McLarens thought on Armistice Day. David blinded, Peter badly injured. So maybe it was relief, but look what it did to that family.
I think that David is only 19 when he was injured. Peter was probably about the same age, and you know, you go out there with all the enthusiasm that you've got, and you come home to illness and pain.
They were an aspirational upper middle class family whose aspirations were suddenly pulled away from them. You know, I'm sure there were tears at private moments and at more public moments, at the memorials that there would have been after the First World War.
Certainly David moved on, but obviously Peter couldn't. And Peter and David were very close. As brothers, they were very close to each other.
There's a determination on David's side, really, that he wasn't going to let the blindness finish him off. He probably did suffer psychologically from that. Very quickly after the war finished, he was able to finance the building of the house at Little Garth, the development of the facility to give himself and his wife and his family a future. And you've got to really give credit for that. You know, it's pretty determined sort of character to take that disability and just live with it and do something with it.
I've shown these diaries to a couple of historian friends, and I said, are they any use? Or is it just kind of village gossip, tittle-tattle, da-da-da? And both of them have come back and said they are fantastic. And they are fantastic because they're unfiltered and because we can see in detail how this society was working with all of its flaws.
We're getting his perspective as a young adult from a certain social class of life in his village on the edge of industrial Teesside. And it's a unique perspective, and that's one of the reasons why the diaries are so important, because nobody else is telling this story from this vantage point other than David McLaren.
I wish I'd known more. I wish I'd asked more questions. You know, I do recall times when I was younger, we used to sit in his knee, and my uncle Peter was my godfather, his son. We'd meet up at the house, and we usually ended up leaving with a tray of eggs. Great card player. For a blind man, he was a great card player. My uncle Richard used to be amazed that he could actually still play cards and not be able to see, but obviously he played with braille cards. Just don't let him deal.